during the course of the service that we bring through these reviews, through just generally providing content for you to engage with, we get a lot of questions regarding what constitutes a good album. We get a lot of feedback of what you think, and a lot of the times it kind of ranges along the lines of what resonates to you personally. So you find that a lot of people don't really consider the external factors that an artist has to deal with when they look at whether or not their albums are generally good. All fans care about is whether or not it resonates with them personally. And of course, that is what a fan is entitled to do, to kind of be so besotted with the artist that everything else becomes a decorative element that doesn't really mean much. This is the fan's perspective. But I'm a critic. And what that means is my job is to assess the work that artists make. Now listen to this. One, in the context of the marketplace that they're active in. So just get that one straight. I'll elaborate. Every artist operates within a zone of economic exchange, what is called a market. They operate in a space that is filled with people who are termed as a demographic that is attracted or has the possibility to be attracted to the messaging and the stylistics that they deliver, right? That is the first, let's call it a prerequisite for how to criticize. And then secondly, I look at the general overall evolution of that artist. So no artist releases a project in a vacuum. Even if it's a debut, there's usually a context of development around the periphery that you can gauge. So you can kind of say, how far has this person gotten with themselves, firstly, in their own artistry, their sense of delivery, their poise, their charisma, their understanding of beat selection, their understanding of threading together the conceptual palette of what anchors their project. Just generally self-awareness, and this is where the authenticity comes in, because that's all authenticity is. It's self-awareness of self in relation to the environment that you operate in, right? So this is the second prerequisite. And then thirdly, apart from the market, apart from the awareness of one's own development, the most crucial aspect is the competitive playing field. The competitive playing field is artists who factor in as similar to this particular artist, and therefore constitute artists that they have to, by virtue of it being in the marketplace, compete with on some level. And it's a balance between competition and collaboration. So therefore every artist is always aware of what people like them or people who are similar to them in style are doing with their art, and that for the most part inspires where they decide to go. Do they follow their rivals or their competitors, or do they decide to forge their own path in order to be considered better in the context of the marketplace? I hope you heard me, because it is these three elements, these three prerequisites that constitute my basis of critique. This is how I do my critical theory. I don't just dig up opinions out of nowhere based on how I feel about an artist. I genuinely do the work of trying to understand what the artist is operating in, how far they've gone with it, and what are they around. in order for me to bring you the conclusion of, have they, in this point in their lives, really improved on their awareness of the market and what it demands of them, their awareness of their own lives and where they are and how to relate that with the market, their awareness of where their competitors are and how to go about navigating the marketplace while still trying to become, essentially number one in a game that always pushes you to be at a certain level of excellence. So if an artist understands those things, you have a good project right there. But if they don't, then you're somewhere around the lines of effort or sometimes just plain despondency. When an artist is stuck in the same place, that means market-wise they haven't been following the changes that are going on in the space that they're active in. They haven't been really paying attention to their competitors in terms of who's doing what. And sometimes may brag about that when it's not even that much of a good thing, because trust me, you have to be aware of what's going on around you in order to know how it relates to you. And thirdly, to know how to tell your own unique story in all of that and not just be borrowing the messages of other people because of the air of where the music is at. You get me? So I hope this little preamble that I've done explains my review of A-Reece's recent project. Because A-Reece is such a popular artist that I get a lot of hate from being critical of him. And I have been very critical, severely critical. Because for somebody who has amassed such a cult following, he sure damn seems like a reflection of everything that's wrong with the country right now. And slow up, let me elaborate. South Africa is in an interesting cusp whereby the younger generation are so locked into the hyperrealism of the global internet world that they have dispatched themselves out of an awareness of their own culture. Gladly, glorifyingly, they seem to incline themselves towards identifying as, I don't know, fucking children of the world, the new cosmopolitan generation, and that's all good and fair. I love it when young people realize that they are indeed bigger than the cultural limitations that have fixtured them locally. But the reality is that there's no way of transcending those limitations without first knowing how to honor them. I'm going to repeat that. You cannot transcend your culture if you never knew how to honor it. Because what usually happens is you leave behind very, very important principles that could have guided you in the future when you have to differentiate yourself in the midst of the whole entire world. And I think, matter of fact, that goes as far as saying, I am sure that what this generation is missing right now, Teta Nanima 2000, is a sense of that honor. They're so head deep in hype beast culture, trap music and amapiano that the only thing vaguely South African about them is exactly that. They move with the current of a sound. And yet their slang, their sense of orientation when it comes to politics is vague at the very most, ignorant at, the extreme. And yes, to be young is to be in a place where some of these things don't matter yet. But in the context of art, they have to. There's no choice. From the beginning of his career as an artist at Ambitious Records, when he dropped his debut Paradise, which by the way was not coincidentally titled that. This was a bright-eyed boy who saw the future, who was signed, who finally saw the dream of rap as he had fantasized about it while watching television. It was this hyper-real fantasy finally being lived in his very own life. And even then, the rap songs were mainly aspirational. Here we had a talent. Here we had somebody who like Nasty C, and here's why the comparison is always made, is uncannily talented in mimicking Drake-esque flows to the T, to the point where they can do their own rendition of lyrics that sound like they could have easily been written by Drake. And it is that ability to be able to sound like the best of what is there at the moment that a lot of people lap up. And when it comes to the first installment of Paradise, we saw naivete. We saw the natural childlike aggression of pushing forward. We saw him saying what he's going to do is establish a paradise for himself. A paradise that, mind you, is not fully defined. But that's fine, because I mean, we don't know what paradise is until we discover it most of the times. So it's okay not to know what you're building up until you get there. But man, it's been a couple of years later, some label woes, a triumphant rise to the cusp as basically South Africa's foremost independent artist, forming your own record label with family and brothers in arms, redefining what you can do with your own market, teaching people about the wave of the internet and the benefits that it poses to an artist in order for them to take their hustle and restructure it outside of old media. There's a lot of lessons we've learned from A-Reece and the gang. But it seems as if these lessons are not imparted in the music. At least not clearly or distilled enough for him to be dropping gems. So for me, Paradise 2, and whenever you sequel something, there's the pressure of whether or not it matches up to the first one. So I will be doing some of that comparison, just for the sake of the narrative. Big-hearted bad guy. I mean, off the bat, I get what that could mean. It means that he's settled in this role of being the villain in an industry that has rejected him. He's decided to basically retaliate. I mean, it's no wonder the label is called Revenge Club. This is definitely an oath against all those who never believed in them and who had the power to move against them. And by them coming together, them being, Reese, J. Jody, Black Les and the gang, so forth and so forth. If anyone I forgot, it's all respect. There's a coming together and a shifting the missile back to old established labels saying your time is up. And if their projects have been anything but consistent as an assault, then the revenge is definitely being felt. So now, the king comes to the fore. And yes, A-Reece is definitely the center that holds the revenge together. He's the young artist who was displaced, found a home, and has now emerged with a throne, being acknowledged by his elder brothers and his literal older brother, and hordes of fans as the right next of kin to South African rap supremacy, which I have continuously rejected because nothing about his raps even honors South Africa. There is no reference to Pitori. There is no reference to anything vaguely explicit in how he points out the social norms and abnormalities. Matter of fact, A-Reece doesn't even reflect on anything but himself. So for me, I feel like this project is more big-headed bad guy than anything. It's an inflation of his already big ego, rightfully so, because he's been able to achieve what very little artists have in this country, which is a dominance outside of old media. He's doing his thing, and therefore he's floating on an ego trip where he gets the freedom to do different variations of hip-hop. I mean, this isn't even classical trap where he kind of began in. It's new wave meets this open-ended boom bap Griselda-esque smoky minimalist beats. Everything is somber. For an album that resides in supremacy, it has quite a sad tone, which tells me by now Reese is going through all of the accolades, but this seems to be one of the most unhappiest periods of his life. But it doesn't make it clear as to why. There's a lot of backlash in his voice. There's a lot of insistence. There's a lot of aggression. There's a lot of still trying to prove himself. To whom, I have no clue, because the message is too nebulous. He names no names. He keeps it vague. Everything here that you would think is offensive is basically veiled as a subliminal. As a result, you never get the sense of who Reese is talking to. You get a personal conversation with somebody who feels like they've justified an open confessional to particular people who didn't believe in him, and he dedicates this project as the testament to his success. A whole 15, 16 odd tracks that don't go anywhere diverse production wise. They kind of just leap into this place of like clanky drums littered with moody guitar riffs and keys and these almost bluish kind of tones. It's just a very sad project. Even in the most kind of optimistic place, which is in the track with Blackie, there's a sense of some level of precedence, but it's not wrapped in optimism. This isn't A-Reece celebrating with a smile on his face. There's tension. He's still being held together by a lot of the things that don't accept him. And if you ask me, my greatest hunch is not being accepted by the country in general. The slimes might love him, and there's a lot of them. But he hasn't festered into the psyche of South Africa like a Jabba, like a Pro, like a Keening, like a Cooley, like a Questa. He hasn't really been the kind of artist South African would speak on behalf in the street corner, Jardini, in Makasana, anywhere where the simple everyday person, and by simple everyday person, I do mean lower rank South African youth. It feels as if his market is middle to upper class youth who are already embroiled in international music and are so divested from their own country that they just float in this place where it's from the West and beyond. And these are the people that harness, channel, and proclaim him to the rest of the world. But it really feels like the majority of the country ain't really fucking with A-Reece like that. He's not a South African staple. He's not the kind of artist that is exportable to us. Because if he did try to export himself, he'd just be a diet nasty C, to be honest. It is so important to understand how to honor your culture before you even dream of transcending it. I mean, he tries. Roping in artists like Manifest to offer these deep dives into their own lives and give us these beautiful flows, giving us Java and Shekina, it's really an attempt to fraternize with the kind of artists who could open up bigger market space. But if you as a rapper have not yet decoded how to rap for the country, then who are you really rapping for? So ultimately, I'm not saying Reese should start rapping in Spitori or in Setswana or in Xhosa or anything like that. I'm saying what would go a long way is if we heard him mention roads, streets, clubs, drinks, shows, media, clothes, or anything that's vaguely South African. Instead of talking about Nikes, how about you reference Ipatu? Instead of talking about All in the Family, how about you talk about Mzinwez and Sizwa? See, this is the messaging that turns an artist into a legendary meme when they embed themselves in the culture of their own land. Reese, like Nasty, is extracting himself from the country in the hopes of this bigger, greater landscape. And I feel like artists besides him, like the Black Les, should give him that advice. That it's only in understanding how to code yourself through the people that the people at large will really vouch for you. So ultimately, what this project is that it's the testament of an echo chamber. It's the bouncing back of the voices of the fans to A-Reece and his own self-indulgent music back at them. To the point where I've seen a lot of the responses to this project and a lot of slimes aren't happy. It truly is a example to an artist who is at the crossroads of their career in terms of the creative capacity that they have. Because Reese has a pretty prolific discography, which mainly dabbles on two fields. He plays around with trap, then he plays around with classical rap. And here he's tried to merge the two worlds in a way that doesn't actually shine any new venues and avenues that he hasn't gone through before. It's exhausting. It's asphyxiating. Because it pretty much feels like the same message being reinterpreted in ways that aren't vast enough to appreciate anymore. So here's a great artist. Great in the sense that they understand their marketplace. Now limiting themselves because they're oblivious to their competitive climate, and they're oblivious to their own journey and what it requires right now. So in those three prerequisites I mentioned of critique, I'd only give Reese the first. He's not aware of anything else at this point, and this is what is suppressing the quality of his music. So what constitutes a good album? An artist who knows how to honor where they came from in order to conquer the world, who continuously pushes themselves and who allows themselves to be bent by the times in order to understand the monster that they're becoming. And Reese is resisting because he feels like where he's at, which is where he's gotten thus far, is probably as good as it might be. But he doesn't realize that there's no more room to grow within this. Drake himself has proven this. And Reese, who's a beneficiary of the Drake style, is stuck in the same place. So what do you do in this moment? Evolve or die. Ultimately, I gotta give this project a 6 out of 10. It's dreary, it's dry, and it's a long entree into pretty much the same places Reese has traveled. I'd rather listen to older projects that sounded newer because the ideas were fresher, because what this is a recycling of treasured aspects, and when you use your treasure too much, it starts to devalue. And there's something in the A-Reece style, just like there's something in the Nasty C style, that is beginning to devalue. We are in times where understanding who you are is so crucial. And by who you are, I don't mean this nebulous romantic idea. I mean like literally, be aware of your politics, your direct local interactions with the people you are around. And if there's anything that's going to get your raps to the place where you feel like you need to go, it's interpreting those experiences and not being a silo to your own egoistic rhymes. My name is VJ, the brother from the ancient mother, and I just want these motherfuckers to act more South African.